Welcome, everyone, to Session 4 of the Furman Prison Education Partnership's inaugural speaker series, Behind and Beyond Bars, Perspectives on the U.S. Prison System. I'm Laura Morris, and along with Sally Morris-Cody, co-direct FPEP. During tonight's program, we invite you to participate by submitting your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Toward the end of the program, Furman student Jordan Zahora will ask our panelists a few questions. Before I hand it over to the same student to introduce tonight's panelists, I want to give you a brief introduction to FPEP. FPEP launched in 2018 with two goals. First, to bring transformative higher education opportunities to university students, incarcerated students, and students recently released from prison, bringing them into classrooms together as equals to engage in dialogue and to learn from people with whom they might not otherwise interact. Second, FPEP aims, through events like this one, to inform thought and action in the Furman community around issues of mass incarceration and reentry. Through our student group on campus, we offer students opportunities to engage with, learn from, and support incarcerated students at our partner institution, Perry Correctional, a prison in Pelzer, South Carolina. If you're interested in learning more about FPEP or becoming involved in our work, please email us at fpep@furman.edu. We now have an official FPEP website on Furman's site, which houses videos of our speaker series, as well as answers to questions we're unable to get to during the Q&A. The web address will be on display at the end of the event. Now, I'm happy to welcome one of Furman's students involved in FPEP, Jordan Zahora, to introduce our panelists for tonight. Jordan?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jordan Zahora, and I am so excited to welcome Larry Epps, Senior Chaplain at Perry Correctional. Chaplain Larry Epps has been around Perry Correctional Institution for a long time. His father was a volunteer chaplain at Perry when Chaplain Epps was younger, and he remembers being on the prison yard and interacting with the incarcerated men there. A career nurse and longtime member of the Army National Guard, Chaplain Epps started ministering in prisons on weekends in the early 1990s, eventually going to seminary and earning a Master's of Divinity with a concentration in pastoral counseling. Chaplain Epps became Senior Chaplain at Perry Correctional Institution in January 2015. In this role, he provides counsel, helping inmates with their emotional and relational well-being. He also is responsible for managing all of the volunteer ministries and programs that run at Perry, including the work of the Furman Prison Education Partnership to bring higher education opportunities to incarcerated students there. We are delighted to welcome Chaplain Larry Epps.
Welcome, Chaplain Epps.
Thank you.
As Jordan shared with us, Chap is the Senior Chaplain at Perry Correctional, FPEP's partner in our work to bring educational opportunities to incarcerated populations. Perry Correctional Institution is a maximum security male prison in Pelzer, South Carolina. At any given time, Perry houses between 850 and 950 men, many of whom will live out their natural lives behind the walls. Over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to ask Chap to talk about his many roles at Perry, the role of faith and religion in prison, the resources men at Perry can access for care for their emotional well-being, and the many programs men incarcerated at Perry can take part in. During the last 15 minutes, we'll take questions from you, our audience. So, hi, Chap. It's great to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
So, to start us off, you are the Senior Chaplain at Perry, but I know that you do a ton of work under that. So, could you talk about what duties and responsibilities fall in that role?
Yes, ma'am. Be happy to. So, one of the things about being a chaplain in an environment like that is the expectation of being able to wear many hats. And so one of the hats that I wear there is I'm the volunteer coordinator for the entire institution. So what that entails is anytime any volunteer is at Perry for any reason at all, I'm the gatekeeper for that volunteer. So it's my duty to recruit them, to train them, to teach them what the right and left limits of their volunteer status is, and to just manage them while they're on the grounds there to make sure that they're not doing or saying anything that's gonna get them in any trouble or anything of that nature. So as a volunteer, they have to be recertified or retrained every 3 years. So I have found that with all of the paperwork and with all the having to do all the data entry and the 2 or 3 different systems. It's a pretty busy job, just being the volunteer coordinator. In addition to that, any donations that are made to Perry, whether it be cash or gifts in kind or books or music or anything of that nature, all donations into the institution have to flow through my office for the sake of accountability, but also having one person on the ground that is the expert in knowing what types of donations we're allowed to take and which ones we're not, and that when those donations come in, the proper procedures are followed, and to keep headquarters in the loop as far as the cash value of the donations that we receive in a monthly and yearly way. Also, when it comes to all matters of religion there, regardless of what the faith is, I am the subject matter expert on that, and really lead that effort there at Perry. So, the way that looks is sort of twofold. If anyone there considers himself a Protestant, regardless of the denominational stance, I actually perform those duties for them. In other words, I am their pastor. I lead all the worship services, preach on a regular basis, do baptisms, give communion, things of that nature. And if it's someone who's of a different faith group than me, i.e. an Islamic or Muslim person, I don't necessarily lead their worship services, but I coordinate with volunteers and recruit volunteers from mosques around the area to get them to come in and not only lead their worship services, but to support them during Ramadan and things of that nature. And so I perform on one hand and provide on the other. Also, if an inmate at Perry has a family member who dies, it's my duty to bring that inmate up to my office to notify them or inform them of the death or the impending death. And I'm the only one there who's allowed to grant that inmate a phone call home. The social workers, associate warden, even the warden himself will not give that inmate a phone call. Only the chaplain will. Also, if there's a death of an inmate at Perry, which does happen, sometimes it's just from a natural cause, a heart attack or something of that nature. We do memorial services for that inmate there at Perry, and we will try to invite 2 or 3 family members for that inmate's family to come and be a part of that. But it's a way of giving the inmates there a sense of closure and to handle their own grief, because a lot of these guys have known each other and have been living together for 20, 30, 40 years. And so if an inmate dies, a lot of times there's a lot of sadness and grief on the yard. So I deal with that not only through the memorial service, but also leading a lot of grief support groups and doing one-on-one grief counseling, things of that nature. Also, for staff, if there's a pertinent event that happens in a staff person's life, whether it's a death, car crash, baby being born, anything like that, I do provide a lot of support and pastoral care for them. And I find myself doing a lot of weddings and funerals for staff, especially those who are not connected to a local church. So it's a pretty busy job. And also, if I see a need there of any kind, a lot of times I will try to find a volunteer who can meet that need, whether it be in leading grief groups or what have you.
I remember, well, and technically, if those of you who aren't as familiar with FPEP, FPEP, we are a volunteer organization at Perry. So Chaplain Epps is the person who we talk to every time we're coming in. He's the one who trained all of us. He's the one who, whenever we're bringing students in, we send everything through Chaplain Epps. And we've been partners for a few years now, really making this happen. So Chap, you talked about you are a Protestant minister. You deal with all of the men who are incarcerated who are Protestants. You lead their services, everything. But I know there are also a ton of different faiths represented at Perry. So what types are represented there? How many people would you say actively believe or pursue faith in some way at Perry?
The number of men who actually come to a service and is probably lower than you might suspect. Is probably 50 or 60%. But the men on the yard who actually have faith or practice faith of some kind is probably higher than that. I'd say 75, 80% of the guys, have some type of faith. And to speak to the variety of faiths at a place like Perry is part of what makes my job interesting and fascinating to a guy like me. Of course, you have Protestants, which includes every subset, all the different denominations. You'd also see there's a pretty thriving Catholic community there. There's a large thriving Muslim or Islamic community there. But we also have a lot of smaller groups like Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, Buddhist, Confucianist, Native Americans, Wiccans, Satanists. But we also have a few that you probably have not heard of, such as a Chartreux and Chatat Natur. And so and also like the House of Yahweh and the Rastafarian community. So there's a very wide variety of faiths that are represented at Perry, and I enjoy the fact that the men there have the right and the freedom to explore different faiths and to try different faiths out and to see what speaks best to their heart and to their faith needs. And of course, you do have a smaller portion of men there who would consider themselves atheist or agnostic or something of that nature. But yeah, faith is a big deal in a place like that.
Mm-hmm. I remember early on when we started talking and when you did our orientation, you talked to us about how important faith is. And I remember you said, no matter what somebody believes, you can't be here and denigrate anyone's faith. You can't say anything bad about it, because for some of these men, it's the thing keeping them alive. It is that important in their lives. Can you tell me about why faith is so important there, and what does this add to these men's lives?
So faith there for many of these men is the one lifeline that they have been thrown that keeps them from drowning. And so for a lot of these men, if we try to take away their faith, I've seen men who lost their faith and immediately committed suicide, or became very violent, started hurting or killing other inmates. And so for a lot of these guys, the faith is the bedrock that they build their entire life on. And a lot of these men were dangerous criminals. They were murderers or rapists or whatever it might be. And faith was the one thing that turned them around and gave them a sense of hope and purpose and a desire to better themselves and to not just be an inmate, and to not let the environment define them, but that they try to redefine themselves based on their faith. I don't know if that makes any sense, but for a lot of these guys, faith is the most important thing in their life. And again, I've said this to a lot of volunteers: if you come in here and say or do something that will weaken their faith or try to pick at their faith, I will remove you as a volunteer. That is a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of sense. I know we've talked about some of the men in there as having really strong faith, and you've told us some stories about them. Can you tell us about, can you give us an example of one man you've worked with who you've seen him go from one person to a different person when he found faith?
Yeah, there's the problem there is try to limit that to one or two stories. There's that's part of my job that keeps me coming back, and that I love about that place so much, is being able to see a man who really is just out of control and who really is living according to a lot of baser lifestyles, and then they find faith, and you see just a complete radical transformation. One is a guy that works for me who I'll mention, named Quan. And Quan was a gang leader. He actually came to South Carolina to murder a man who had disrespected his gang, and they were out of state. And he drove all the way into South Carolina to kill this guy. And when he came to prison, he was a very dangerous guy. He was still pretty connected in the gang world, and would have assumed a pretty high-ranking role within that gang inside the prison system, because they do exist there. Mm-hmm. And while he was incarcerated, not long into his incarceration, he found Christ and became a Christian, and actually was able to participate in another higher education program called CIU, the CIU Prison Initiative. It's a local seminary down in Columbia that takes inmates, and they house them all in one prison, and they go through and get and earn their associate's degree, and then they come back to each prison and work for a local chaplain. And so by the time I met him, he had already came all the way through the program. And but even when he first came to me, he was still a little rough around the edges. And I could tell that he had came from a pretty violent background. But just in the last year or two, I have seen Quan's faith blossom to the point that he's become a leader on that yard. He protects me. He's told me before, Chaplain, they'll have to kill every one of us before they get to you. And he's a big, muscular looking guy. And so I will walk into any dorm with Quan by my side because I know he loves me. And he's loyal and faithful, and just his character and integrity are beyond reproach, beyond question. And another one is my chief clerk, who was on death row before I got a hold of him. And when he came to Perry, again, he was still pretty rough around the edges, but he responded so well to the message of faith and of love and grace and mercy that it melted down every wall that he had built around himself. And he has become a champion of men there at Perry. And it's like throwing a rock in the middle of a pond, is what I always say. And those ripples that go out from men like that causes good everywhere they put their foot. And so it's an honor for me to work with men like that and to see that transformation on a daily basis. I love it.
Mm-hmm. And we've worked with both of these men you're talking about, and they've been great. Quan, as you said, he's a big, muscular guy. And of course, there are people who look at women walking into prison. And when we had that issue once, Quan fixed it immediately. He just went and talked quietly to the man, and the man, we've never been bothered by him again. This is how it goes. It's a very quick, short conversation, and it's over. And your chief clerk is always willing to help us when we are trying to get paperwork in, because I know you're bombarded with papers. So he really works to smooth, I think, your work out, and then also the interaction between you and volunteers, which, yeah, I just, when you talk about these men and you talk about their past, I've never seen the past to them. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about it a little bit and go, oh, this is the background of these men, but we know them as these guys who have been amazingly helpful and just great men to work with in the system. So.
Yeah, as you guys know, chaplains have been furloughed from SCDC for a couple of months because of COVID. And I was up there a couple of days ago and saw Quan and Tommy for the first time in a couple of months, and just hugged them both and felt tears welling up in my eyes. And these guys are friends to me, and I miss them. In fact, there's a song that says, "I've got friends in low places," and some of my best friends are wearing prison orange right now. That's a fact.
Mm-hmm, definitely. Yeah. We haven't been, Sally and I haven't been in prison for a year now, over a year. It was last January, the last time we were in, and we understand the safety, but I think it breaks all of our hearts when we don't get to go in there and see these guys.
Well, those men miss you all too. Trust me, it's very mutual.
Yeah. Hopefully soon. Hopefully we're getting to that point. So we'll see. But so let's talk a little bit about education. So we talked about faith as being something that these men find is really important. You've also talked about other things, men really finding purpose in other things like education or programming. Could you tell us more about that?
So my faith is important to me, and it informs a lot of who I am and how I look at the world. So I'll start there. Okay. Mm-hmm. The scripture, there's a verse in scripture that says, "And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." And for me, ultimately, that truth points back to Jesus Christ. But I think, you can take that verse and interpret that in the sense that anytime we become, that we know truth, that we're exposed to it, and that we apply that truth to our own heart to the exact degree that I know it and understand it and apply it to my heart, to that exact degree, I can be free. And so there's a lot of truths that are outside of the Bible that didn't come from the Bible. So, for example, if I know that I go to bed, early and eat right, that I'm probably going to be a healthier person, then I'm more free, I'm healthier. And so as these men learn, whether it be learn to read or write, or, they, especially with a higher education, I've seen a lot of these men grow and learn and change from that. Even if it's a man who's a complete atheist or a man who is really not the nicest of person, we expose them to knowledge and truth I think there's something to be said that knowledge is power, and it sets us free. And so these men, I've seen a lot of growth and change and maturity in a lot of these men because of the classes that they've taken and the things that they learn. And any college student who has earned a bachelor's degree has had that same experience, that they have learned things that have changed their life or changed their perspective on life. So I'm always going to be a huge proponent in education and higher education. And I'll say this for a fact. There's not one man that works for me, nor would I ever consider hiring a man who's not interested in learning. Every man that works for me is in college right now. I can tell you that. Every one that works for me. I wouldn't hire a man that wasn't interested in getting more education.
Mm-hmm. And that's fantastic. This learning, I like the knowledge as power, because I think, and this, I'm going to switch into a little bit about spiritual and emotional health here, because this is, because there is so little power for these men when they're incarcerated. And you've mentioned in the past that being incarcerated is a form of trauma, like being in prison daily is traumatic. So from your perspective, what are some of the most common emotional issues you see the men at Perry struggling with?
Are you speaking to that trauma about being incarcerated?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think if you ever sit down and talk to a man or spend time with him and just observe him who's doing time, most of those men will tell you the hardest thing about doing time is not doing time. That's the easy part. I have found that in the military with guys who are deployed. The hardest thing is not being deployed. It's being separated from your family, especially during times of tragedy or trauma. For example, for a man or a woman who's in prison and their mother is sick and in the hospital, and not only can they not go to the hospital and visit them, they can't go to the funeral, they can't send flowers, they can't, there's very little that they can do. So not only am I not there to be with my loved one, but the fact that I can't be there with my mom as she's on her deathbed, I know is causing her more pain. And I can't assume my role as the son or the daughter that I should be. And also during holidays, it's really tough knowing your family is together right now and enjoying a meal together or laughing and talking together. And you look up and all you see is iron bars in a cage. I have seen that do a lot of damage to a man's psyche. From being at Perry. And so one of the things that I try to do as a chaplain, especially when during the holidays or during those times of tragedy, is to keep them as connected as I can with their family. And also, at least, even if it's just for a few minutes, to help them to forget that they're in prison. For example, during Christmas time, we bring in as many groups as we can to sing Christmas carols. We're putting Christmas trees up everywhere. We're feeding them a large meal. We're having a big party for them or something every year to remind them that they're not forgotten and that we love them and that they do still matter as a human being. Mm-hmm. It's very important. It's vital.
Yeah. Yeah. And so during COVID over the past year, has that trauma been even worse? I'm sure that some of the men have lost family members from COVID.
Yeah. So, 2020 was one of the hardest years that I've ever had to serve as a prison chaplain, because I'd be in front of these guys and that you'd see men who are pretty tough guys who I've never seen shed a tear, crying like a baby because they hadn't heard from their mom in a few months, can't get in touch with her. Maybe she's in the hospital with COVID and I don't even know where she's at or which hospital. Is she still alive? So on and so forth. And the fear and the separation and the loneliness. There's been a lot of darkness in prison in the last year or so because of COVID. I honestly have never seen anything like it, and I have tried my best to combat it. But to make it even worse, at the height of all of that, they have sent every chaplain in the state home. And most chaplains have shed a lot of tears over that. I know I have, because, here it is when it's really the times are at its darkest. I want to be there to put my arm around these men, to love them, to comfort them, to encourage them. And I got sent home. And so it's been a tough time for everyone.
I believe it. I believe it. I know that programming, everything has been. I know no volunteers have been able to get in, so it's a very different place, and I can't imagine what it's been like this past year.
Yeah, it's been very, very tough, and the suicide rate's gone way up for SCDC in every prison. We've had a lot more suicide than normal. A lot of guys that have got involved in drug and alcohol abuse that maybe never was really involved in it before, just as a way of escaping the reality of where we're at right now. So yeah, it's been tough.
Sadly, that makes sense. So what sort of resources did the men have access to care for their emotional well-being? Like, are there counselors, psychiatrists on staff? How do the men get access to that?
Well, the answer is twofold. So as far as the actual staff, the Perry staff that are there, we have a large nursing staff there. We have probably about 6 LPCs or LMFTs or social workers there. We also have one psychologist who is there at least every day during the day. But during normal operation, I've got a lot of volunteers who are retired clinical psychologists or psychiatrists, licensed professional counselors, grief counselors, who volunteer quite a few hours every week that I bring in to lead grief groups or psychoeducational groups or psych groups. And so usually under normal operations, we've got a lot of mental and emotional and spiritual type support for them, but a lot of that rug has been jerked out from underneath them during this crisis. But I've got lots of friends who are on the staff, the counselors and whatnot now, and they're telling me that they have been completely overworked because a lot of that I used to take off of their shoulders, they're having to manage themselves right now. So it's been a lot worse than normal.
That makes a lot of sense. Are any of the small groups able to run? Like, I know there's Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous. Has any of that been able to continue running, or is that everything on hiatus?
Yeah, everything. Again, because most of that is run through volunteers.
Yeah.
I try as much as I can with every group in there to have it run by a volunteer rather than an inmate. If I don't have a volunteer who's interested or capable of running a group like that, I would certainly turn that over to an inmate. But most of those programs have been shut down. You have to realize not only do we not have any volunteers in there, but they're not allowing inmates to congregate. So inmates can't, it's not like they can get 100 of them in one room and lead a church service or something like that. What I do know is going on is that in each wing of each dorm, and there's about 95 men in each wing. A lot of those wings have some religious activities that are going on, some prayer groups that are meeting on a daily basis, things of that nature. But as far as the support groups and things of that nature, and groups like AA, NA, Celebrate Recovery, or grief groups, like Grief Share, things like that are not being held at all right now.
Okay, yeah, that is really unfortunate, but I also understand it. For those of you who haven't really thought about this, one of the nature of prison is that the men are housed very close together. So any sort of illness runs rampant in prisons. And of course, COVID runs rampant everywhere. So they have to mitigate that by, I think, keeping men in their own housing units so they're not allowed to congregate outside of those units. I think this is what you're saying, Chap.
Yeah. And it's all in an effort to, to slow the spread of it down.
Exactly.
And of course, we're using PPE and things of that nature too.
Yep. And I know that Perry has done better than some other prisons. There have been if you look at the numbers across the nation, prisons have been hit hard by COVID. And I know that Perry has had 2 outbreaks, but both of them have been brought under control at this point.
Yeah. We had a total of about 160 men, I think, total who, wound up catching COVID. And I think we had about 4 deaths, if my memory serves me right.
Okay. So, and this is, sadly, that's much lower than a lot of other prisons, even other prisons in South Carolina. So Perry has been every prison's doing what they can. Right. So, yeah. Now I'm going to jump forward a little bit because you talked about the importance of having people who are willing to come in and volunteer. saying you would much rather have someone give their time to Perry than to give their money. Why are, during normal times, volunteers so important in prison?
Well, never forget, and I've made this comment to inmates before, because they'll come up to me and maybe they haven't been at Perry very long, and it usually takes me a while to learn somebody's name. Like, I have to see them several times and I'm like, tell me your name again. But after I've heard it 4 or 5 times and I've seen them enough times, I will remember it. But a guy come up to me and say, you don't remember my name? And I'm like, brother, please remember, there's like 1,000 of you and one of me, right? And so I had a dream one time. I think it'd be a good thing for me to share this with you. I was out in the middle of the ocean in a very small boat, what us country boys would call a John boat. And I looked down and I had a coffee cup in my hand, and I heard the Lord speak to me and say, dip. And I start dipping the water out of the ocean and pouring it into the boat. And I dipped and dipped and dipped until I felt like my arm was going to fall off. And I switched to the other arm and started dipping with that arm. And finally, I realized, I kind of cried out to the Lord and said, I'm never going to get to the bottom of this. And the Lord said, the ocean that you are on top of is all of the pain and the grief and the sorrow and the loss that exists in this place. And I never had the expectation that you would dip to the bottom of it by yourself. So you need more people to help you dip. And so those people that are helping me dip, to deal with the overwhelming load of grief and trauma and pain and loss and self-loathing and shame and all of that, is the volunteers. And there is no expectation from SEDC that I could ever do this job by myself. You know, here I am, they're paying me. It's not a lot, but they're paying me to do what I do. But then I have folks like you, Dr. Laura, or Dr. Sally, or of the 370 volunteers that I have at Perry right now, that are coming in there completely free of charge, that really are the ones that are making the most difference there. That's one reason why that I love the 23 men that work for me, because I train them up. It's what the military would call a force multiplier. I spend time training them and mentoring them, and they go out and they share what they've learned from me out on the yard. And that's what really makes the greatest impact at Perry. I couldn't do the job I do without volunteers. To me, I see them as royalty, and I'd much rather have you as a person than your money. People call me all the time and say, let me write you a check. And I say, well, I appreciate it. I will take your check. Obviously, I need it. But would you consider giving of your time? I'd much rather have you than your money. It's a very valuable commodity and resource there. And let me go on and expound on that one step further, if I can, Dr. Laura.
Of course.
When those inmates see a volunteer walk in the door, it speaks volumes to them, because it lets them know, the whole world may have forgotten about you, but I hadn't forgot about you. And the whole world may say that you're not worthy, but I'm telling you that you are worthy of my time and my energy and my investment. And I am here because you do matter. You are a human being, a child of God, created in the image of God. And you are worth my effort, and you're worth my time. And I have seen over and over and over again, maybe men who won't even respond to me will respond to a volunteer. And I'll see them blossom like a flower because of the love and the devotion and the energy and effort of a volunteer. It makes an eternal impact in the lives of a lot of these men.
Mm-hmm. I remember the first time I came in to teach a class, we asked the men, do you have any questions for us? And they asked why we were there. And we got to give a little bit of background of like, here's why I'm here. And I think just giving that heartfelt answer of, I want to be here. Nobody has forced me to be here. Here's what I'm hoping for. I want to work with you guys, and I want to get to know you was, and I had worked in prison for a lot of years. So giving my background there and saying, and now I'm excited to be at Perry, I think it changes things. I think it's like, oh, here's a person who actually wants to be here. And it caused them to open up a little bit, and there's some trust that happens there.
Well, let me, and I want to pick your brain if I can, Dr. Laura, because I've been working with SCDC most of my life, and I already know what the answer is, but I just want to hear it from you. Is that going into prison, you think, I'm really going to make an impact here. I'm going to, really shape a lot of lives and things of that nature, and you do. But it winds up shaping you and changing you and enriching your life more than you could ever enrich the life of an inmate. You always get more than you give.
Oh yes. Oh yes. This is what always just blows me away. I feel like if they get even a tiny bit of what I get through going in there, I'm excited because I feel like I walk out so much richer.
Right.
And these years, I worked in a women's federal prison and now in Perry, and both places I have met people who have taught me so much. I have worked on projects with people and thought, I'd never get this anywhere else. I would never be this. I don't know. I can't even quite put it into words, but you gain so much by going in. It changed my life. I mean, there's no way around it.
People are always surprised when I tell them, people ask me why I do it. And one of the answers I always have to give, because I want to be honest about it, is I'm having a ball there. And I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't work in a place like that unless I could have fun. And I have so much fun there. Every day, every time that I'm there, I'm having a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is also like, I also want to let people know walking into a maximum security prison can be a little daunting.
Especially at first, right?
Especially at first. I'm so used to it that I don't even think about it really. At the last prison I was at, I learned very quickly not to wear the same colors that the people who reside there wear, because when you walk up to a window, you might get yelled at until they realize you're a volunteer. Learned that the hard way. But got yelled at once and thought never wear gray or khaki again.
Probably don't need to wear a lot of orange when you come in other words.
Exactly. So I don't wear any orange in Perry, but it is when you walk in, a door opens in front of you, then it shuts behind you and locks before the next one unlocks. So it can be a little daunting at first, but I have just met amazing people in Perry and in any of these programs that I've gone into. And I do get that we don't meet every single person in Perry. And I do get that there are people I probably don't want to meet there.
Right.
And that's okay. But those who really want to be there for the educational opportunities, it is fantastic to work with them and to interact with them at
Right.
Perry.
Right.
So one thing you've talked about in the past, and this has really shaped my way of thinking about prison, is that Perry is its own self-contained society. These
Right.
men live their whole lives in there. I mean, some of them 20, 30, 40 years, so that it becomes a society and they're not interacting so much with the outside world. What are some of the programming opportunities that these volunteers, because you're bringing these volunteers in from everywhere, what are some of the programming opportunities that the men have in there that you've been able to bring in?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question in the sense, and there's no way I could cover that much material in this brief milieu. But let me just say that anything you can imagine, and probably stuff you can't imagine, we have had at Perry. We have, you guys can take classes or can get a job working in horticulture, where they're working kind of in a greenhouse environment, or planting in the garden, or planting flowers, or just working on the general beautification of the place. They have classes they can take on beekeeping, and we have several active beehives there all the time. We have a dog therapy project there, and guys who are taking classes on how to be a dog handler, and are getting to work directly with the dogs or use the dogs, for pet therapy with guys who are traumatized in one way or another. There's classes, again, you guys can learn their GED. They can go take a lot of college level classes, whether they be biblical based classes or secular based classes. There's music classes that are going on, guys learning how to play the guitar, the piano, whatever it might be. There's leadership classes. There's guys learning how to do brick masonry, or how to do basic carpentry. it's unbelievable the amount of educational opportunities that go into a place like that. And these guys learning how to do basket weaving, guys who are learning how to do woodworking or learn how to work with leather. There's an incredible array of classes and groups and programs that guys have an opportunity. We even had a volunteer to reach out to us recently who wanted to do some equine therapy, wanted to bring in some horses to work with the guys. And we got it all the way up to the point of approval from the headquarters until it became aware that there was going to be some safety concerns or insurance issues, and headquarters kind of backed out of it at the last second. But if somebody brings an idea to me and said, this is something I'd like to do at Perry, I'm usually trying to find a way to make it work rather than to find a way to shoot it down, because I've seen guys come alive with some of the strangest things. We even had a class there about sports and sports history, or military and military history, and guys have just really bloomed and come alive under that. And so it's like a city on a hill. Anything you can imagine that would go on in a typical city, they've got, the schoolhouse, they've got the church, they've got places where they go to work, they've got the mail room. There's all kinds of different jobs and opportunities in a place like that. So again, it's a very happening place. I tell people all the time, if you ever want to see an interesting thing, you should come and sit in my office, like in the corner, and just be quiet for like an hour. And you'll see it's like a beehive. There's always guys coming and going, and it's just a busy happening place. But I wouldn't have it any other way. I love it like that.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed that when we're there, if too many people come in all at once, you're like, okay, we need a few minutes alone now. But when
I gotta breathe.
Exactly. But then when we're done having our conversation, you have a whole line of people out in the hallway who are ready to come talk to you because they've been waiting then.
Yeah, we created a thing that we called it the bus at one point, that we put all these chairs going all the way down the hallway facing my door. And they wait in line in those chairs, like 6 or 7 chairs deep. And when the guy in front of you gets up, you just move forward a chair. And when you're in the first chair, you're the next one getting to come and see me. So there's usually 6 or 7 deep waiting to see me on any given day.
Yeah. And which is fantastic. I've never been, if it's on lockdown, the few times I've been when it's on lockdown, it's been quiet. Otherwise, it is a busy place.
Yeah.
So to our audience, I have one more question, and then we're going to start taking your questions. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A for our moderators. But I'm going to ask you one more. This one needs a little bit of context, Chap.
Okay.
As you said, you currently employ 23 men, incarcerated men, to help run the chaplain's office. You work closely with them. And I've heard you in this talk today call multiple men your friends. You've talked to them. You've talked about them as close friends. Can you give an example or two of someone you consider a friend, or can you talk about how those friendships have evolved, and how do you maintain that line between being a staff member but being really good friends with these incarcerated people?
Well, I can give you, lots of examples on how they've evolved. I'll say that one of the most unique aspects of this environment is, believe it or not, there's a lot of folks there, well, probably not a lot now, but especially when I first started, who hated the chaplain. And I realized right away, dude, you don't even know me. Like, you hate what chaplains represent, or maybe you've had a bad exposure with a previous chaplain or whatever it might be. But these guys, when I would walk across the yard, I would hear them cursing my name or yelling at me or saying something bad about me, or but inevitably, when that happens, I have seen that something eventually bad will happen in that person's life. For example, I've already told you, if an inmate's family member dies or gets sick in the hospital, I am the only gatekeeper to put them in contact with their family. And so inevitably that kind of thing will happen, and they'll come to me, and I can see them giving me what the most people would call giving you the stink eye. And so I would see them doing that, and I would just respond to them with grace and love and mercy. And it's almost like they don't even know how to respond to that. Here I am hating on you, and you're showing me love and kindness. And ultimately, I have found the secret that love and mercy and compassion, that when it's demonstrated on a consistent enough basis, breaks through any wall. It is stronger than hatred and stronger than death. And so some of these men have become my best friends. I've seen a radical transformation in their life. Many of these people have become men of faith, humble themselves in front of me. And actually, they would just start hanging around the chaplain's office so much that I couldn't get rid of them. And I'd say, well, gosh, I can't get rid of you. I might as well just hire you. At least then you're here legally. And so that has been a fun experience. And I think even with Quan, it's kind of a good example, since we've mentioned his name already. When he first came to me, we didn't really get along that well. We were both very strong personalities. And I would tell Quan, somebody's got to be in charge here and it can't be an inmate. Do you mind following my lead? And it became a real tug of war for us for a little while. But at some point, he would humble himself and would come into my office and would talk to me and submit to my leadership. And ultimately, I loved him from the beginning. So it wasn't like I had anything to forgive. But I have found oftentimes it's the people that we fight with first, that out of that conflict and that honesty, that reality there, that some real depth in relationship and friendship can be formed. And I certainly see that played out in a place like Perry. Does that answer your question, Dr. Laura?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah, it's hard. You spend a lot of time with these men and you really get to know them, and they are people. I think you mentioned this early on, this coming in as volunteers, coming in and treating them like the people that they are,
Right.
the fully formed humans, and you get to know them. And I'm sure that there are people who it's harder to like, but it's also, there are a lot of men that it's really easy to like in there because they are kind and you get to know them and they're interesting people.
Right.
So,
I tell people all the time, for anybody that works for me directly, any of those 23 men, I challenge you to come in and not like them. If you don't like one of those men that works for me, that says more about you. There's something wrong with you, because these guys will treat you like royalty. They're always going to be very kind and respectful. Yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, whatever. They're always going to be trying to protect you and look out for you. They're always going to be, looking out for your best interest. And how do you not like somebody like that? They'll be quick with a smile, quick with a joke. I've trained them to be that way, if nothing else. When men and women come in here, you treat them like they are your own mother or your own sister or your own brother, whatever, and treat them like family. And I have seen these men do that like champions. So I'm very proud of them.
yeah, no, they've been great. So I want to thank you for answering my questions. For the final 15 minutes, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to audience questions that have been coming in. And anyone in the audience, you're more than welcome to continue with your questions. And for now, I'm going to pass it back to Jordan so that she can lead us.
Thank you, Dr. Laura.
Thank you, Chap.
Hey y'all. So as a reminder, my name is Jordan Zahora and I am a sophomore member of the FPEP student group. So we've had a number of questions come in from our audience over the last 45 minutes. And remember, if you have a question you would like Chap to answer, please submit it in the Q&A box. So with that, the first question is that you've mentioned that you've had some of the incarcerated men working for you and you talked a lot about their relationships with them and that type of thing. But can you talk more about what they do for you and what jobs they have?
Sure. So, as I said, I've got 23 inmates who work for me. Okay. And the job title or job expectation for these men varies greatly. So, for example, I've got men who, like for my chief clerk, I actually have 3 clerks who work for me who do nothing but admin type work. So they create documents and memos and request forms. They respond to communication for me to other staff or other inmates. They take dictation from me. They help keep me on track as far as meetings I have during the day or phone calls I'm supposed to return, whatever. So I've got 3 men who do that, and they all fall up underneath me, obviously, but then with I kind of have like a rank structure. So the chief clerk has 2 men who work directly for him. So that covers the clerks. I also have men who all they do is grounds maintenance. There's always an environment like that because we have such a high flow of men and volunteers in and out of that place all the time. We clean those bathrooms 3 or 4 times a day. I tell them if a volunteer or an inmate walks into one of our bathrooms, I want it to smell like a lemon or a rosebud in there. And so they're always cleaning the bathrooms or cleaning the windows or wiping the walls or mopping if guys come in and they, track dirt or mud in the hallways. So we have guys who, probably 2 or 3 guys that are doing grounds maintenance on a routine basis. I've got guys who kind of serve as my personal assistant. And it sounds very self-serving, but that's not even a job I created. It's a job men have volunteered to do, to come in and fix my coffee for me and set it in front of me in the morning. They'll come in every 15 minutes and stick it back in the microwave if I hadn't drank it fast enough. They'll heat up my lunch or clean my dishes for me. Or just, make sure if I'm leaving the building, hey, Chaplain, it's raining outside, don't forget your umbrella, things of that nature. I've got guys that maintain all the equipment in a place like that because, in most places, if the guitar breaks, you would just take it to the shop. Well, we can't afford to do that at Perry. We don't have a budget for that. So I've got men there who are really good at taking a guitar apart. I didn't even know you could do that, but they would take the guitar completely apart. They would fix whatever's wrong and put it back together again. I've seen them take, an entire, like a 32 channel mixing board apart, fix some little fuse in there and put it all back together again. And it works better than it ever did before. Guys who their only job is to teach music classes or to teach other classes. I've got 2 men who work for me. Their only job is to pray. They're in that place all the time, praying for me, praying for other men who are going through issues, or just praying for God to bless the house, And so I've got guys who all they do is they're runners. They're always delivering this message for me, or taking this card to this person, or this person's asked for a Bible or a book. They'll deliver that to that individual, or going across the yard to make copies or whatever it might be. So really, my goal, believe it or not, is to have 30 inmates working for me. But I'm just not going to hire somebody to be a warm body. I'm looking for guys who have certain skill sets, but I still need 7 more men to work with me there. But believe it or not, I keep those men very, very busy. They don't have a lot of time to rest while they're at work.
I believe that. So is it more based on like skill level when you assign them to these specific jobs, or is it more like to fill the role, or how does it work?
So it's kind of a manifold answer to that simple question. So when I first hire a guy, I will tell them straight up, I am not impressed by your education. I'm not impressed by your past accomplishments, by your talent, your skill. Those things don't move me. When I hire a guy, initially, I hire him because of his character and his integrity. Because I'll tell him, if you've got a lot of character and integrity, and you have a heart to serve, and you can humble yourself in front of me and other people, we can teach you a skill. And I have hired quite a few people like that. But oftentimes, I will have in the back of my mind like a list of skill sets that we're trying to fill. And so, for example, if I meet a guy who's a really good electrician, he was a certified electrician on the street. I'll start spending time with that guy to look and see, does he have the character and the integrity and the humility that I'm looking for? So, but I have to be able to marry those 2 things together: skill plus character and integrity and humility. Does that make sense?
Yeah. This is kind of along the same line, but more focused on education. So how did the men at Perry get into the classes that are offered there? Do they have to apply, or are they selected?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both. So guys are required to apply to be involved in any educational process. So I'll take those applications, and let's just say I have 50. I'll go through the list and I'll make sure that a guy doesn't have a disciplinary action in the last year. And if he does, is it a track record? For example, if he's always exposing himself to female officers, that person is never going to be involved in any class, especially where there's female volunteers or female students. If I know he's got a problem, if a guy is known for striking staff, he's going to have to let a lot of time pass before I'm going to have him around students or volunteers, whether they be male or female. So yeah, there is a process to where they have to apply, but then I screen those men, and then of the men I screen, I will cherry pick. So for example, with FPEP, because I know we're talking about bringing students in there, and many are going to be young, beautiful females, I'm going to do a lot of cherry picking, believe me, because Dr. Laura and Dr. Sally can tell you this. When you ladies are in there, I'm like a cat on a hot tin roof. I'm always nervous, and I'm always treating you like you're my little sister, because I want you, while you're there, to feel safe and to have a good time. And I don't want you to have that feeling you have when somebody is undressing you with their eyes. It makes you feel kind of dirty. And I don't want you to go out of that place feeling like you need to wash your hands. That's not going to happen on my watch, not in this lifetime.
Awesome. So the next one is more about the psychological health there. So you mentioned that there are psychiatrists and psychologists at Perry. Is that a service that men at Perry seek out regularly? And is it hard for them to access these types of services?
So the answer is yes and no. So the guys have to seek it out in most cases, unless they have a diagnosis that is official. Like if they've been diagnosed with schizophrenia or something of that nature, they're required to do check-ins on a routine basis. But it's a lot harder sometimes to objectify, like, is this person depressed, or they have an anxiety? It can be a little harder to quantify that. And so a lot of times we're screening, we're always on the kind of looking at guys. Like if I know your mom just died, I'm probably going to approach you and talk to you and make sure you're not really depressed or you're not suicidal, something like that. And I will recommend you, hey, why don't you consider being a part of this group or that group? But as far as the psychiatrist or the retired clinical psychologist or whatever that I have it come in, those are volunteers. And I will call a guy and say, and up to my office and say, would you consider taking this class with this guy? I think you could benefit from it. But that might even be because another inmate has told me, this guy, he struggles with a lot of OCD or a lot of anxiety or whatever. And why don't you consider asking him about being in this class? And then that has worked out positively a lot of times.
Yeah, it's awesome that those resources are there, because I feel like a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
So we have one more question. So who can volunteer at Perry? And then do you need a special talent or education to volunteer?
Okay, so the short answer is anybody can volunteer at Perry. We have my father, before he died, was a volunteer chaplain at Perry, and towards the end of his life, he came in an electric wheelchair because he just got to the point from walking to the parking lot down to where the men are was just too far of a walk for him. And so anyone can volunteer at Perry, regardless of, even if they have a handicap. And there's no education level required. We've got volunteers coming in there who don't even have a high school diploma, and I know that for a fact, who really don't even talk all that plain. And I'm not, again, if somebody approaches me and say, I really have a heart to make a difference here, to serve these men in some way, again, it's the same with the volunteers as it is for me hiring an inmate. I'm looking for their character. I'm looking for integrity. I'm looking at their motivation. Why do you want to serve? And if I find out you're wanting to serve at Perry because you're trying to find your future husband, I probably won't let you come in as a volunteer. But if I know you're there for a good motive, a good reason, I'm going to find a way to get you in the door. Now, if you've served time in the past, especially if you served time at Perry in the last 2 or 3 years, I will approach you and say, you can probably serve, but you need to wait a few years. There's like a 5-year time limit that the SCDC wants you to wait. But even if you've been an inmate at Perry, 5 years later, you can come back in Perry as a volunteer. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. It's awesome to know it's so accessible like that.
Yeah, it's wide open.
But that's actually all the time we have today. So thank you so much for sharing your stories and perspectives with us. And then we hope to see all of you back here for our final event that will take place on April 19th. We will be talking to Dr. Katie Ryan from West Virginia University about advocacy and support of incarcerated people. If you want to learn more about FPEP, just email us at fpep@furman.edu. And I hope you all have a great night.
Thank you.